Tonight, we are not just talking about an ancient structure. We are about to dissect a technical secret that has been hidden by time for nearly 2 millennia. A secret built from stone, blood, Roman audacity, and mechanisms that even modern engineers must admit are completely unbelievable. So, before we embark on this journey, if you love mysterious historical stories told with all my dedication, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. That helps me gain more strength to continue delving into the dark corners that history often forgets. And hey, comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's amazing to see a whole world map light up from all of you. Now, dim the lights a little. Let the gentle melodies take you back into the past. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will open completely different perspectives on one of Rome's most powerful wonders. Hold on tight, the best part is yet to come, and you won't want to miss it. If you want to understand why the Roman Colosseum became a timeless engineering masterpiece, you have to go back to the moment when Rome decided to confront its very own land. This was not a safe choice. No sane person would choose an old muddy lake once used by a capricious emperor as a backyard to build a 50,000 seat structure. But Rome was not a civilization that worked safely. They looked at that swamp and said, a bit of volcanic ash, some lime, a few thousand workers, and done. That was the operating philosophy of the Roman Empire. Push the limits by pretending there are no limits at all. When the first workers stepped onto the damp ground of the old lake area, they understood that they were standing on something that did not want to be built upon. Right beneath their feet were mud, sediment, and water seeping into every crack of the soil. Any modern engineer would consider a nightmare. But the Romans embraced it as a personal challenge. They spread stones, poured concrete, and transformed that soggy land into the foundation of one of the greatest structures humanity has ever built. To achieve this, they relied on a material that today's engineers look at with both envy and despair: Roman concrete. This legendary material was not only hard but also intelligent, with an almost self-healing chemical ability. Whenever a crack appeared, new mineral crystals would form, filling the gaps as if the structure had its own immune system. Um, Meanwhile, modern concrete begins to crumble after just one season of rain and sun, as if asking for early retirement. Rome made this material not because they fully understood its scientific mechanism, they only knew it worked. And for the Romans, working was the highest standard for continued use. This empire was not obsessed with theory, they were obsessed with results. You can see it in the way they built: concrete at the core, travertine stone wrapped outside, iron clamps holding everything together. A giant sandwich, both refined and brutal, aesthetic yet challenging every earthquake for 2 millennia thereafter. The iron clamps between the stone blocks, looking like the improvised sutures of an ancient surgeon, are exactly why this structure has not crumbled into rubble over time. The combination of flexibility and rigidity is what allowed the Colosseum to endure war, weather, and countless earthquakes that a modern structure would only cope with by filing for a rebuild permit. When entering the building structure, the first thing that stops you is the system of arches. The massive arches were not merely decorative or architectural motifs. They were the backbone, a sophisticated force distribution system, the secret that allowed a structure the size of a massive stone block to stand without collapsing under its own weight. With each arch, force was transmitted, spread, and then evenly dispersed as if the entire building were breathing in rhythm. And that is the core of its strength. Curves are stronger than straight lines, as the Romans understood long before any digital blueprint was ever invented. Another interesting fact: these arches did not exist in isolation. They were connected in a chain, forming an extremely stable, load-bearing network. Imagine hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder in a circle, each supporting part of the weight of the person next to them. That is exactly what happens inside the Colosseum, except instead of people, you have thousands of tons of stone, and instead of a circle, you have a massive elliptical structure. And when it comes to design, we cannot ignore the vomitoria, the passageways that allow tens of thousands of people to enter and exit within minutes. Even a modern stadium would require countless 3D models, drawings, and meetings to optimize crowd flow. Rome did not. They built a giant tunnel system, each passage calculated to vomit the crowd out as quickly as possible. And it is so effective that today, architects still study this model when designing stadiums. But every detail, from the arches, foundation, to the passage system, is only the technical part of a much deeper story. The Roman Colosseum was not only meant to impress with power, it was built to shape the emotions of the crowd, to remind them that Rome was not just a city, Rome was an experience. This building was constructed to make every citizen feel small before the empire's greatness, while simultaneously being embraced by the generosity of power. It is a structure made of stone, but operated with psychology. Stepping into the Colosseum, the Romans felt that their empire ruled not only through the army or law, but through something far more elusive: awe. And that is why Vespasian wanted to build it right where Nero once displayed vanity. Every stone was a reminder. Rome could make mistakes, but Rome knew how to correct them on a scale no civilization dared to imagine. This empire used engineering not only for beauty, but to send a message. And that message, 2,000 years later, remains intact. If you want power, build something that even time must respect. If the outer arches were the Colosseum's proud greeting, then what lies deeper inside is where you begin to realize that this structure is not just large. It is so intelligent that even the 21st century must bow in bewilderment. As you move deeper into the structure, you no longer see a giant stone circle, but a conscious machine where every brick, every arch, and every corridor is performing its function as if participating in an architectural musical directed by the Romans. Let's start with something many people always overlook: intentional repetition. Every arch, every passageway, and every tier seems identical, but don't be fooled. The Romans did not do this to show off their concrete copy paste skills. They repeated it for efficiency. Just as you replicate a module in programming, the Romans replicated the structure to ensure that pressure, weight, and crowd movement were evenly distributed across the entire massive block of stone. The upper arches support the lower ones hold the entire framework, and together they form a web of stone that even a major earthquake would only make slightly uncomfortable. But the real genius begins to emerge when you enter the interior space, where the Romans did not just build a building, they built a human operating ecosystem. What amazes modern engineers is not the size or durability of the Colosseum, but the way it handles 50,000 people simultaneously and turns them into a smooth flow, like water in a canal. Imagine you are an ordinary Roman citizen, wearing sandals that have survived 3 rainy seasons, eager to see a lion challenge a gladiator's patience. You hold a tiny wooden ticket in your hand and head toward one of the 80 entrances, all numbered, scientifically designed, and placed in positions that would make modern crowd management architects blush in shame. Just a few minutes later, you are in the right spot, not lost, not trampled, with no one asking, hey, which number is this? This is the first physical algorithm in history, an algorithm the Romans wrote in stone instead of programming code. Go even deeper, and you will see what makes this entire building extraordinary: the ability to evacuate 50,000 people in 10 minutes. No LED signs, no modern ventilation systems, no advanced safety technology, just stone corridors cut at perfect angles, creating natural branching paths that allow the crowd to flow out automatically like water pouring from a vessel. The Romans did not build to stand. They built to operate. And that is when you begin to realize that they did not build the Colosseum as a structure. They built it as a self-operating machine, an intersection of engineering, crowd psychology, and performance art. But don't think the brain of this structure lies somewhere on the surface. No, the real brain, the part that makes every modern engineer sigh and wonder why they weren't born in 80 AD, is the underground system, where every square meter is a testament to the Romans' ignorance of the word limit. Beneath the arena floor, the hypogeum is not a simple technical area. It is a separate universe where natural light never reaches, a place where the roar of wild beasts mixes with the tension of stretched ropes, the creaking of wooden platforms, and the hurried footsteps of hundreds of slaves racing against every moment of the performance. A lion could appear from beneath the ground in seconds. A jungle scene could rise by noon and vanish by afternoon. A gladiator could stand in darkness, sweat dripping, hearing the heavy breath of a nearby leopard, uncertain whether the trapdoor will spring open or what lies above awaits him. All of this happens thanks to a network of lifts operated entirely by human muscle. No engines, no structural steel, no computers, only levers, wooden gears, and force balancing techniques so precise that a 1 millimeter error could cause the entire system to collapse like a broken noodle. These lifts did not just raise the animals. They lifted scenery, props, and sometimes even the hopes and despair of those standing on them. And what determined the success of the performance was not strength, but absolute precision. Everything had to be lifted at the exact rhythm, angle, and moment of force. In many cases, a mistake would not just cause an accident, it would ruin the entire performance in front of 50,000 hot-tempered spectators, a nightmare worse than facing a hungry tiger for any modern event organizer. The strangest thing is that no one really knows exactly how this system worked. We have drawings, simulations, and records, but most of it remains in the shadows of history, as if the Romans intentionally left a riddle with a mischievous smile. Try rebuilding it, if you dare. And perhaps that is what makes the Colosseum a symbol of fearless audacity. It did not just stand for 2,000 years. It stands there as a reminder that there was a time when humans could build things far beyond the thinking of their own era. If you think that all the ropes, props, doors, lifts, and underground systems beneath the Colosseum were only to showcase Roman power, you're only half right. Because Roman engineers didn't just want to design a giant machine that could move, they wanted to create an illusion so grand that tens of thousands of people sitting in the stands would no longer feel like they were inside a building. They felt as if they were in the middle of a desert, or in a haunted forest, or amidst a stormy sea. When the performance began, everything in the Colosseum had to disappear. The stands, the architecture, the stone columns, the sunlight, everything had to recede so that only one thing remained: the story. The Romans understood this. They knew that a crowd absorbed in a story would not question why they were trapped in a 40-degree Celsius pressure cooker with 50,000 other people. And to keep the audience engaged, they turned the entire arena floor into a massive stage operated by human power and daring. Most of the time, the slaves below had to operate everything in complete darkness, where the only light came through the slits of the wooden floor above. Imagine standing in a sweltering underground chamber, the breath of wild beasts blowing from iron cages, the roar echoing from the tiers above, and the supervisor shouting, "Pull harder! The gladiator is coming up!" No one was there to cheer for them. No one acknowledged their presence. But every movement, every breath, every tug of a rope determined the success of a performance worth a fortune. And that is what makes the system beneath the Roman Colosseum one of the boldest engineering feats in human history. It was not designed for safety, but for spectacle. In that stifling darkness, enormous wooden machines creaked with every turn, producing sounds like twisted bones. Each lift required at least a team of people to operate, and they had to move with absolute precision. Not a beat too slow, not a hand trembling. One small mistake could launch a gladiator onto the arena at the wrong angle, or push a tiger onto the floor when the trapdoor hadn't fully opened. Such mistakes happened, and the Romans, as history has shown, were not patient with errors that caused damage. Yet, despite the constant tension and looming danger, the system ran for hours on end, day after day, year after year. It operated with such precision that even modern researchers admit if just a small part of the system failed, the entire performance would become a disaster. But that rarely happened, because the Romans turned engineering into art, and art into a tool for displaying power. And when the audience had become accustomed to lifts, wild beasts, gladiators, and props rising from the ground, Rome decided to go even further. They wanted to change the sky itself. When the velarium, the massive sunshade, was deployed, its sound resembled that of a gigantic monster awakening. Tens of meters long ropes stretched like bows, rattling as the wind struck the fabric. The naval commander stood on the edge of the Colosseum, shouting orders to keep the system balanced because a strong gust could turn the entire canopy into a deadly trap, sweeping everything below. But when the velarium stabilized, the sunlight suddenly changed. It was no longer harsh and scorching. It became softer, gentler, as if someone had applied a color filter to the sky. The wind was directed through gaps, cooling the stands, making those who had sat under the sun for hours more patient and comfortable. And a comfortable crowd shouts louder, reacts more strongly, becomes more frenzied. And that was exactly what the Romans wanted, a sea of vivid emotion. The Valerium was not just a sunshade, it was a primitive air conditioning system. It was ancient stadium magic. It was a statement: we do not build merely to exist, we build to dominate. But don't think that the Colosseum's grandeur ends with what the audience can see. Every performance was a gamble with fate itself, because beneath that beautiful wooden floor was a completely different world, a world of mechanisms, ropes, springs, levers, cranks, and people living in darkness. They were the foundation for the gladiators' glory, those who silently sacrificed to create moments for the audience to cheer and the emperor to wave in satisfaction. While on the arena floor, gladiators risked their lives to be remembered. Underground, slave workers risked their lives to be forgotten. That is the stark reality of this wonder. But it is precisely that contrast between light and darkness, between surface and depth, between life and death, that made the Roman Colosseum a structure that withstands the test of time. Not just because it is beautiful, not just because it is massive, but because within it lies the entire philosophy of Rome. If you can amaze others, do it. If you can make them silent, do it. If you can make them believe Rome is immortal, do it immediately. The Colosseum is not just a building, it is a statement in stone, a colossal machine fueled by audacity, risk, and boundless ambition. A place where the Romans not only enjoyed violence, but also reveled in the very way they made violence. Beautiful. If you think what the Romans did with the Valerium, acoustics, ventilation, or earthquake resistance was the pinnacle, then brace yourself. Because the most astonishing part of the Roman Colosseum does not lie in what you can see, it lies in what you cannot. The hidden mechanical system beneath the marble, which makes the entire arena operate smoothly like a living machine, is where Roman ingenuity reveals itself most vividly. Imagine this: while the audience cheers loudly from above, beneath the ground is a completely different world. A dark, stifling world, full of ropes, pulleys, iron locks, cranes, and narrow chambers, where hundreds of slaves and workers labor continuously like the gears of a colossal machine. The Romans didn't just build a stadium, they built a theatrical stage so sophisticated that every trapdoor, every animal cage, every lift could completely change the rhythm of the spectacle in the blink of an eye. And the remarkable thing is, all of this happens without the audience above ever knowing. It is an achievement that modern Broadway stages still envy. The hypogeum, an intricate two-level underground beneath the arena floor, is where all the real magic happens. The lifts are operated by human power, using large pulleys and wooden levers. With just a single signal, a team of workers would simultaneously push, pull, and strain, sending a lift weighing tons, carrying a tiger, leopard, lion, wild beast, or a gladiator to appear in the arena as if born from the earth. The audience sees a marvel, but those who understand engineering see ancient, heavy industry. Each mechanism beneath the arena is like a secret performance. The pathways are marked with unique signs designed to keep wild animals completely separated from the gladiators until the precise moment. A single second of error meant the show was over, literally. Yet Rome, with its cool heads and iron discipline, made everything run so smoothly that it seemed natural. What makes the hypogeum astonishing is not just its complexity, but its precision. You cannot release a tiger when a leopard is meant to appear. You cannot lift a gladiator from the wrong trapdoor. You cannot allow a lift weighing several hundred kilograms to get stuck in the middle when 50,000 people are waiting for the next act. Yet somehow Rome made every transition happen at exactly the right moment, as if they were conducting a light show that could never miss a beat. And that's just the hardware. What about the software? That is what gives the Colosseum its identity: sensation. The Romans understood that to hold the crowd's attention, you needed more than blood and clashing steel. You needed rhythm, you needed surprise, you needed the unpredictable interwoven with what the audience expects. They created dramatic moments in ways that any modern stage director would admire. A trapdoor opens slowly, heat rises from the ground, the vague shadow of a wild animal, all meticulously orchestrated. This is art calculated with precision. If the gladiator is the protagonist, the hypogeum is the director behind the scenes, controlling the rhythm of the battle. Remarkably, the entire system operates without electricity, without engines, without computers. Human power, wind, simple mechanics, and design precision turned an ancient arena into a living stage. And that says a lot about Roman thinking. They didn't just build to stand, they built to operate. But the true power of the Colosseum does not lie in producing the roar of wild beasts or the groans of gladiators. It lies in creating collective emotion. When 50,000 people hold their breath, shout, and feel every sound as if it occurs right next to them, it is no longer architecture. It is psychology. And the Romans, though without the word psychology, understood it instinctively. They built the Colosseum as a tool for crowd control, a place where emotions could be triggered, amplified, and guided. Every detail, from acoustics, airflow, sunlight, shadows, to how the wild animals appeared, served the feeling of being at the center of something immense. They created an environment that made you feel small before the grandeur of Rome, yet simultaneously a part of it. And that is why the Colosseum is not just an engineering feat. It is a political statement. The hidden engineering of the Roman Colosseum does not lie merely in stone, pulleys, lifts, or seismic knowledge. It lies in the ability to make 50,000 people share the same moment of thought, the same moment of fear, the same moment of excitement. That is the true genius of Rome. They did not just build a building, they built a machine for collective emotion, and it has operated perfectly for nearly 2,000 years. In an era when armor protected not only life, but also honor, these suits of armor reached a strange grandeur. They became statements in metal. But even more astonishing was the way medieval artisans elevated them into a kind of visual language, each engraving a story, each pattern a declaration of power, lineage, and loyalty. It was at this intersection of war and beauty that Europe witnessed the flourishing of an unprecedented phenomenon, battlefield fashion. Because imagine this: amid the clatter of hooves and steel, dust and blood, there were shimmering figures that seemed to step out of legend. Knights wore armor so exquisitely crafted that when sunlight touched it, it did not merely reflect light, it reflected the self, ambition, and pride of each wearer. A knight could enter the battlefield with a completely distinct style: rigid, straight lines for practical warriors, flowing, wave like patterns for those pursuing beauty, a golden lion's head for those who wanted to instill fear before striking with the sword. And this transformation did not arise solely from vanity. It reflected something greater: humans' desire to be recognized, even when encased in dozens of kilograms of iron. Feudal society, highly attentive to status and reputation, quickly turned armor from a mere utilitarian object into a kind of mobile press. People looked at you and instantly knew your family, your loyalties, where you had fought, even whether your temperament leaned toward brutality or finesse. Each suit of armor was a dossier written in metal. But this change also sparked a new race, a race in which the battlefield was no longer the only stage for asserting oneself. Powerful families wanted more than victory. They wanted to step onto history's stage with the splendor of royalty. And to achieve this, they needed master metallurgists, those who held a different kind of power, the power to make fame immortal. From this emerged Europe's renowned armories. If Milan was the heart of elegance, Augsburg the monument of precision, Nuremberg was the sanctuary of strength. Artisans there did not merely forge steel, they forged symbols. Some created armor with details like crosses interwoven with Gothic motifs. Others brought Renaissance art into metal, engraving each line as if sculpting marble, and everything was handmade, each hammer strike carrying patience, pride, and the craftsman's obsessive pursuit of perfection. Interestingly, armor of this period reflected not only warrior culture but also the economy and fashion. When the nobility wished to display status, armor increased in complexity, demanding more expensive materials. Gold, silver, black steel, blued steel, enamel, all blended into creations that could make any jeweler envious. Some suits of armor were worth an entire village, and some even carried their own insurance. But the spirit of the era was not only in the glitter, it also manifested in technical advancement, a subtler but equally important aspect. Artisans faced a difficult challenge: how to make armor both beautiful and protective, yet still flexible enough that the wearer did not appear as a walking chest. Joints were refined, ultralight hinges invented, steel tempered with secret formulas to be tough, thin, and light. It was a craft honed over centuries of warfare and elevated by the demand for display. In other words, in a turbulent Europe, armor became a rare meeting point for art, science, and warfare. And it was precisely this fusion that produced masterpieces that still astonish viewers today. A beautiful suit of armor could immediately tell you that its wearer did more than fight. They wanted to be seen, remembered, and celebrated. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how armor tells invisible stories. Stories of a family's pride, of battles long past, of artisans who spent a lifetime crafting the perfect pair of gauntlets, and of the desire for immortality of those living in an era when life was as fragile as paper. Looking at a suit of armor today, you see not just steel, you see ambition, you see rivalry, you see vanity elevated to art. You see the harshness of the era, but also the brilliant beauty it produced. And that is what makes medieval armor so captivating. Not because it is a war tool, but because it is living proof that humans in any era wish to leave their mark on the world, whether through writing the massive stones of the arena or the gleaming steel on the battlefield. If battlefield armor embodied survival, then tournament armor was where knights allowed themselves absolute display without shame. Because in medieval tournaments, war was only a very small part of the picture. The rest was boasting pride, stage movement, and performances so intricately staged that Hollywood would envy them. Knights stepped out of their tents as if walking the red carpet, and the audience gasped in the truest sense, because each step they took sounded like the drumbeat of wealth. Tournament armor was custom designed, often heavier, more elaborate, and served a completely different purpose: to overwhelm the opponent before they could even raise their lance. These armors could shimmer in sunlight, reflecting cobalt blues or sparkling golds to the point that they looked more like artworks than protective gear. And indeed, part of the reason nobles invested heavily in tournament armor was that it needed to catch the eye from afar, since the stands were often so crowded that people had to observe the knight through reputation. In that context, decorative art continued to flourish like an unquenchable fire. Engravings that were once subtle expanded into small narrative panels. Motifs that had modestly adorned the edges of armor now spread across the entire body, turning a suit of armor into a living painting. If you were a knight and failed to leave an impression on the audience after leaving the field, sorry, you had completely failed in the eyes of the nobility. Instead of the solemn religious motifs on battlefield armor, tournament armor welcomed dramatic extravagance. Warriors were engraved as if riding dragons. Angels descended with flaming wings. Flowing floral patterns could make any Renaissance artist take a second senate careful look. And when artisans were free, or when the client was extremely wealthy, they added hidden images, small details that only the sharp-eyed could spot. These could be the family's initials, a prayer, or even a little joke concealed within a ridge. The higher up in the nobility, the fiercer the competition. Because when you stood in the stands and saw your opponent step out in armor with gilded silver trim, you no longer thought of victory. You thought about how to dress better than him next time. Some counts even unhesitatingly spent fortunes to hire a private workshop exclusively for themselves. When they said, "I need a new suit of armor," they weren't talking about body protection. They were talking about protecting their reputation. This subtle competition drove metalworking further than any battlefield could. Artisans experimented with new alloys. They discovered ways to create more stable, saturated colors. They invented inlay techniques previously reserved for royalty. From dotted inlay, striped inlay, to multi-layered inlay, all served a single goal: to make a knight's armor the first thing seen and the last thing remembered. But tournament armor was not just for beauty. Its structure was adapted to suit each event. Jousting armor, for example, had shoulder plates so thick they resembled a movable stone wall. In a joust, you didn't need to run, twist, or defend against multiple weapons. You only needed to withstand a single thrust and survive. Those shoulder plates acted like the shield of a metal beast, blocking every incoming lance. Armorers even reinforced them with layered steel to disperse impact force, much like modern armor absorbs bullets. In other tournaments where speed and agility mattered more, armor was crafted differently: looser joints, evenly distributed weight, and sometimes wing shaped plates to create a majestic stride effect as the knight moved. If battlefield armor prioritized survival, tournament armor prioritized performance. And in the Middle Ages, performance was perhaps even harder than survival. And that's when heraldry reached its peak influence. Not just a logo, not just a family brand, a knight's tournament heraldry became a social statement. One knight chose deep blue to convey calm. Another wore blazing red to say plainly, I am here to fight and to win. Some were bold enough to display beasts, snakes, wolves, or demons, symbols designed to make the audience whisper about them before they even stepped onto the field. Horses, symbols of power and speed, were decorated no less. Horse armor bore motifs corresponding to their rider, creating a cohesive visual whole. When they charged onto the field, you did not just see a man in armor. You saw a moving symbol, a perfect fusion of human, steed, steel, and story. Finally, when knights gathered in the square, the afternoon sun reflecting off their armor, you witnessed what battlefield armor could never offer: unrestrained luxury, beauty for its own sake, and metalwork art pushed to the era's ultimate limits. In that moment, armor was no longer merely a tool. It became a statement that the Middle Ages were not as dark as people think. They were brilliant, creative, and knew how to dress in a way we can only look up to today. When entering the world of personalized armor in the late Middle Ages, you realize that knights did not merely wear armor, they owned it, defined it, and in many cases, they became the armor they donned. And this is when we delve into a silent yet fierce competition, the battle to see who could turn cold steel into the most powerful personal symbol. A battle without bloodshed, but full of ambition and no less ruthless. By the late 14th and 15th centuries, armor had far surpassed its original function. It no longer simply protected a knight from a lance or sword. It became a message, a declaration in metal, carved with pride and the belief that what you wore on the battlefield could outlast even your name on a tombstone. And that's when knights began demanding things that only the most masterful craftsmen could fulfill. They wanted armor that hugged the body, yet remained light and breathable. They wanted gauntlets engraved with family mottos, yet strong enough to withstand a blow. They wanted greaves decorated with motifs from their family chapel, yet flexible enough to ride all day without cramping. Every detail was personalized. Every ridge had intention. Every pattern contained a story that only the upper echelons could read. A knight only had to step out of his tent, and everyone immediately knew which house he belonged to, what region he came from, and most importantly, what message his family wanted to send in the coming battle. Imagine stepping onto a vast training field in Burgundy in the 15th century. You would see a sea of armor, yet no two suits were alike. Some breastplates were engraved with crosses symbolizing devotion. Others were adorned with lions and dragons, symbolizing lineage and power. Some helmets were elongated like a Japanese fish drum, so bizarre you wondered if the wearer could see anything. But that was the point. Uniqueness was what made one memorable. And although all of this was magnificent, it told a much larger story. That medieval European society regarded armor as an extension of the self, a part of identity that could not be separated, and therefore it had to be perfect in every line. But personalization did not stop at artistry. It extended straight into technical design. Some knights wanted their armor as light as possible to move faster on the battlefield. Others, particularly wealthy lords, wanted armor thick and heavy to be nearly impervious. And then there were those who followed the path of fashion, prioritizing appearance over function. As long as it looked dazzling by candlelight at a banquet or under the sun in the festival square, it was enough. Interestingly, armorers always catered to every idea, even when it defied practicality. If a knight wanted his gauntlets engraved with chrysanthemums to show loyalty to a lover, the armorer would do it. If a lord wanted a breastplate depicting an angel wielding a sword to protect his family, they made it. If a young knight wanted his greaves engraved with flames to look cooler in the sunset light, well, they did that too. That was the logic of the Middle Ages. If you had the money, you didn't just buy armor, you bought a symbol of yourself. However, the escalating customization race also brought a very interesting problem. Many suits of armor became impractical to the point of being unusable in real combat. Some were too heavy to ride a horse, some were too thin to withstand a lance, some looked beautiful but could not sit down, and thus the nobility needed additional sets: tournament armor, battlefield armor, ceremonial armor, parade armor, performance armor, ambassadorial armor, feast armor. Much like a modern person has shoes for every occasion. To understand the madness of this, one only needs to look at a common scene at European arms fairs of the time. A famous armorer standing before his stall, displaying more than 10 suits of armor, each with a completely different purpose, and all already pre-ordered, just waiting to be engraved with the owner's name. Identity was no longer woven solely from heraldry or family colors. It was forged in steel, polished to reflect light like a mirror, and passed down through generations as a treasure. But the true uniqueness lay here. Despite differing styles, varying levels of decoration, and distinct crafting techniques, all these armors told the same story. The story of an era where life and death were separated by a horse's heartbeat, yet humans still sought to infuse art, pride, and personality even into the tools of war. A suit of armor was not just for survival. It was how they wanted to be seen, how they wanted to be remembered, and sometimes it was even a way of saying, if I must fight, I will fight in style. As the guests began approaching the estate, they could feel the pulse of the party even before stepping through the gates. The harp music floated in layers, blending with the hurried footsteps of servants rushing to complete the final preparations. The ancient Egyptians did nothing halfway, especially when it came to evening feasts for the elite, where prestige, faith, and extravagance merged like layers of color on limestone walls that had stood for thousands of years. A group of young servants lined the paved path, holding vessels of perfumed oil made from blue lotus petals, the scent once regarded by priests as the soul of dreams and rebirth. As each guest entered, the servants gently poured a few drops of oil onto their shoulders. This was not merely a welcoming ritual, it was a subtle message. Tonight, you are stepping into a world of the finest things the host can offer. Then, as the guests formally entered the main courtyard, the scene before them was a visual symphony. Large columns painted red, blue, and yellow mimicked towering lotus blossoms, as if the entire garden was alive and swaying with the wind. Beneath their feet, hand-woven carpets stretched out, patterns undulating like the sun's journey from dawn to dusk. Each motif told a story of the god Ra, of the canals, of life rising from the Nile's fertile silt. At the center, the dining tables were arranged in a U shape, a symbolic choice, a wide-open embrace. Just as the Egyptians believed hospitality measured virtue, not merely wealth. The low tables were polished to a sheen, while seats for the head of the family were intricately carved from imported cedar wood, a material so expensive that only the wealthiest could afford it. Artisans carved sacred animals on the armrests, lions symbolizing authority, bulls for prosperity, and falcons representing divine lineage. Yet the heart of the feast was the food itself. As the sun dipped behind distant palm groves, servants carried large silver trays into the courtyard, releasing aromas that spread like waves and filled the space. The scent of sweet roasted duck mingled with cinnamon, warm barley bread just out of the oven, golden honey slowly drizzling over pastries. Together they blended into a hymn celebrating abundance. But the ancient Egyptians cared for more than taste. They regarded dining as a ritual touching the divine. Fruit plates were arranged symmetrically: orange, grape, date, fig, all following the principle of ma'at, the harmony of the universe. Missing a color or misplacing an item could be seen as disrespecting the sacred order. Nearby, a group of musicians began playing the first notes of the opening song for the feast. The sound of long harps, hand drums, and wooden flutes intertwined so smoothly it seemed they had been rehearsed over lifetimes. Each musical piece had purpose: a song for ancestors, a melody for Hathor, goddess of joy, and a tune to bless the host. The host, head of the family, appeared last as a testament to their status. Their attire was designed to impress like a walking architectural marvel: smooth white linen, a belt of gold leaf, and a wesek collar so heavy that an ordinary person could not wear it for more than a few minutes. Yet they carried it as if it were part of their body. Every step of the host was calculated. as if leading a ritual capable of shaping the fate of the entire family. Many guests observing this meticulous preparation could not help but see a parallel with the armor of medieval knights, not in form, but in philosophy. Every detail is a declaration. Just as armor was once inlaid with gold and silver to tell stories of valor and lineage, tonight's Egyptian feast was a proclamation in light, fragrance, and sound, an artful ritual expressing power, faith, and refinement. As the feast reached its climax, dancers appeared. They did not merely dance, they told stories through movement. Each turn reflected the winding Nile. Each arm gesture represented Horus's wings in flight. Guests understood that they were not simply watching a performance. They were witnessing a tradition stretching back to the construction of the pyramids. And in that moment, the truth became clear. An Egyptian feast was not just about eating, it was how they defined identity, how they told the world that beauty and order could exist even in a harsh era. Just as knights turned steel into art, the Egyptians turned dinner into legend. And if anything connected these two completely different cultures, it was the deep human desire to make one's life memorable, worth seeing, and worth recounting. As the dinner began, the space seemed to breathe in rhythm with the guests. The sound of footsteps gliding across the polished stone floor blended with the subtle creak of chair chains as the nobility sat down, creating a background music for the magnificent performance unfolding. Each place at the table was calculated not only according to social rank, but also according to how the light fell on each guest's face, like a painter arranging every stroke on a living canvas. The polished bronze oil lamps, reflecting light into smooth golden streaks, shone down on each dish and piece of jewelry, transforming the courtyard into a miniature galaxy of metal and light. Servants moved skillfully, carrying trays of wine and herbal infusions, each step like a dance. As they poured lotus wine into thin glass cups, the light passing through the petals created a faint blue haze, causing any guest to pause for a few seconds, cherishing the moment as if witnessing a miracle. It was not merely pouring wine, it was a ritual. The wine was a conduit between the mortal and divine, between past and present, between host and guest. Each dish presented was a sculpture made of food. Golden roasted goose with crisp skin sat on a silver tray inlaid with gold, surrounded by soft figs, plump grapes, and pomegranate seeds sparkling like jewels. The Egyptians believed the arrangement was not only for aesthetics, but also to harmonize cosmic energy. Every detail followed the principle of Ma'at, absolute balance, order, and harmony. Even the placement of vegetables, fruits, and pastries had to be balanced in color, shape, and texture, creating a miniature symphony on the table. But it was not only light and form, sound and scent were also meticulously orchestrated. Musicians released melodies of harps, drums, and flutes into the space, with rhythms adjusted to match the servants' steps and the guests' breathing. Gentle smoke from incense burners, blending lotus, frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon essential oils, wafted through every corner, purifying the space while soothing the senses. Guests hardly noticed they were breathing. They were living within a spiritual and aesthetic envelope where every sense was stimulated without being overwhelmed. Noble Egyptian women shone in thin linen dresses, gold from beads, bracelets, and necklaces reflecting the firelight. Each arm movement or subtle tilt of the head created waves of light, turning them into living figures in a moving painting. Men were equally captivating, with long robes adorned with intricate patterns, perfumed with cinnamon and myrrh on their chests, sometimes swaying with their steps. The meticulousness of appearance was an unspoken dialogue. Who was powerful, who was wealthy, who skillfully honored tradition and made an impression. Children in the family, raised from an early age to understand rituals, participated in their own way, walking around with small trays of fruits or pastries, their eyes sparkling with pride as they witnessed adults treating every detail as if gods were watching. They were the continuation of tradition, learning to tell the story of the family and virtue through every detail of the feast. Beer, date wine, and lotus wine were not merely drinks. They carried ritual significance, elevating the feast to a living offering. When the first glass was raised, it was not only a gesture of celebration, but a message to ancestors, deities, and themselves that this was a place of abundance, harmony, and power. Guests sipped lotus wine, inhaling the faint aroma, tasting the pure sweetness and the soft blue color reminiscent of the Nile, as if stepping into a world both earthly and divine. Desserts were equally elaborate. Honey cakes coated in golden layers, shaped like lotus flowers or animals, each wrapped in cinnamon and flax seeds, all symbolizing abundance, skill, and aesthetics. A slice of cake, a few figs or grapes, all arranged as offerings to the divine. The Egyptians believed such luxury invited blessings, and each guest, as they partook, became part of the ritual, witnessing the perfect harmony between humans, nature, and the divine. The space, sound, light, scent, food, and drink all formed a seamless whole. Even the movements of the servants or the adjustments in the musician's rhythm were calculated to create harmony, allowing anyone entering to feel the sacred order the Egyptians called ma'at. Every tiny detail, from placing the oil lamps to arranging each pastry, reflected the philosophy that beauty, balance, and perfection were expressions of power and prosperity. As the feast continued, the host slowly walked around, observing each gaze and gesture. They were simultaneously organizer, guide, and central figure in this living performance. Every laugh, every story, every raised glass fit into this intricate script, and as night fell, oil lamps reflected on the walls, the guests' faces, and the dishes, creating a scene any artist would dream of. The feast was not just a meal, but a living painting, a multisensory symphony, a ritual honoring abundance and power. The noble Egyptian dinner was a harmony of all elements: form, function, and spiritual meaning. Every detail had a reason for existing. Every dish, every sip of wine, every light, every scent told a story of power, tradition, and the connection between humans and the divine. And when it concluded, guests departed with memories not only of taste, but of sight, smell, and sound. A complete experience, an evening the ancient Egyptians called perfection, where every sense was honored and every soul invited to partake. As the music and scents mingled in the air, the noble Egyptian feast began to reach a state of perfection. Each guest became a heartbeat within the living whole, where every sense was stimulated yet refined. Servants moved skillfully between tables, carrying trays of lotus wine, honey beer, or fruit wines, bowing respectfully before pouring each glass, as if every action carried sacred significance. No glass was left empty. An unfilled cup was not only inconvenient, but also a sign of disrespect. Every drop of wine spilled on the ground was an invitation for ancestral spirits to witness and partake in the joy of the living, connecting the mortal world with eternity. Music became a bridge of emotion and ritual. The musicians, trained from a young age, mastered the subtle language of Egyptian rhythm, guiding the mood of the feast. The harp's notes, the soft tones of flutes, and the sway of the drums were placed precisely, shifting in intensity with each dish, each step of the dancers, and each moment of the evening. A single note from the sistrum, an instrument associated with Hathor, the goddess of joy and music, could transform ordinary conversations into a spiritual ritual, allowing guests to feel the presence of the divine like a warm breeze embracing the space. Dancers, their bodies adorned with gold beads, slender ankle bracelets, and scented oils reflecting the light, moved gracefully across the floor, blending sensuality and elegance. Their hands glided softly like waves, feet stepping precisely to the drum beat, and body movements inspired by the gentle flow of the Nile. Guests did not merely watch, but became part of the performance, swaying to the rhythm, snapping fingers, whispering prayers, or inviting dancers near the ancestral altar, believing that the departed also enjoyed the music like the living. Every small gesture, clapping in time, whispering praise to Hathor, was considered an expression of reverence. Meanwhile, servers and attendants performed their tasks with absolute precision. They carried trays of food, poured drinks, and attended to guests without interrupting the feast's rhythm. The trays, crispy roasted goose, stews, dates, grapes, figs, honey cakes, were arranged in layers of color, texture, and light, creating a vibrant culinary painting. Light touched the dishes, reflecting off the guests' jeweled ornaments, making the scene dazzling and enchanting. The storyteller waited for the perfect moment to speak, when the servants had cleared the tables, and the music shifted to gentle melodies, guiding the guests into tales of mythology, family history, or subtle anecdotes of power. Each story not only entertained, but also emphasized the host's status, knowledge, and refinement. Compliments, exchanges about linen, perfumes, or jewelry contained multiple layers of meaning, showcasing wealth, authority, and skill in maintaining social order. The rituals surrounding the feast were equally meticulous. Hand washers knelt before the guests with alabaster bowls of fragrant lotus water, performing precise gestures, drying guests' hands with soft linen, and bowing respectfully, symbolizing the cleansing of earthly dust in preparation for entering a sacred space. Smoke from incense burners, blended with essential oils, drifted through the courtyard, purifying the space and creating the impression that both the living and the dead were attending the feast. Each newly served dish came with a musical cue, a small ritual to prepare guests' minds for enjoyment. Drums announced the arrival of a special dish or a distinguished guest. Beer was poured smoothly, richly, seasoned with honey and spices, symbolizing nourishment and abundance. As guests raised their glasses, they both savored the flavors and participated in an ancient ritual connecting humans, nature, and the divine. As the feast progressed, the rhythm of music, the movement of servants and dancers, the pouring of wine, and the telling of stories all combined into a continuous chain of motion, a sophisticated mechanism in which every part was essential. The harmony of movement, sound, scent, and light transformed the feast into a living ritual where each guest, each servant, each dancer, and every dish was part of the sacred whole. As the night slowly wore on, the music slowed, the light softened, and the scents diffused like a message that joy and abundance were not merely fleeting moments. They were part of the cycle of life, the connection between the mortal world and the divine. Under the silver moonlight reflecting on the Hebrides River, Thrace gradually revealed its complex face, where each tribe was like a gateway into its own world filled with power, tradition, and intrigue. As night fell, the flickering fires from the military camps glimmered through the forest, and the sounds of insects mingled with the rustling wind to create a wild symphony of nature. In this setting, tribal leaders gathered not only to discuss strategy or harvests, but also to display their strength, wealth, and social connections. Every word, every gesture was carefully considered, like each note in a piece of music at a noble Egyptian feast, where the banquet served as a stage for power and prestige. The Thracians, with their innate warrior instincts, understood that controlling information, grasping the psychology of opponents, and reading subtle signals were as important as the power of weapons. During the gatherings, meetings took place under the flickering light of campfires and strategically placed oil lamps, serving both to illuminate and observe. Seemingly minor details, a carefully folded cloth, a hand lightly touching a cup, or a fleeting smile, could signal a new alliance or foreshadow an impending betrayal. Just as the ancient Egyptians interpreted sacred symbols at a feast, the Thracians observed the smallest actions to assess loyalty, ambition, and political acumen. Teres, the son of the Adrian lineage, appeared in this context with a calm but decisive demeanor. His eyes swept across the leaders, each flickering fire reflecting off their leather armor and foxskin helmets, illuminating the warrior tattoos on their arms. Teres not only saw the present strength, but also recognized wasted potential. Wealthy but divided clans lacked tribes capable of uniting but yet to find common ground. He knew that power did not rely solely on victory on the battlefield. It also came from controlling information, forging alliances, and seizing opportunities when opponents were complacent. The scene around Teres was no different from a noble Egyptian feast, but instead of music and wine, there were the sounds of cautious footsteps, the crackling of fire, and calculating gazes. Each clan tried to display its resources, gold from mines, strong horses, or even loyal servants. All served as means to demonstrate strength, authority, and stakes. Taris realized that to unify Thrace, he needed to act like a conductor, leading the tribes in a symphony of power without shattering its delicate balance. Conversations during the night were not merely exchanges of information. They were strategic, intertwined with social cues and authority. A compliment on the strength of a warrior unit or the wealth of a clan could be the key to forging an alliance. A question about harvests or the source of gold could test caution and honesty. In this tense atmosphere, which maintained a calm exterior, Teres learned to read each person, understand the psychology of each leader, and shape his strategy to gain influence without triggering open conflict. Meanwhile, Smaller clans moved like wolves in the dark, carefully weighing each step, always ready to react or seize an opportunity. Every action, from who poured wine for whom to who was invited near the fire, carried political meaning. These details were akin to the rituals the Egyptians performed for their gods, not merely formality, but a demonstration of awareness of the universe and power, with Teres serving as the coordinator, ensuring the balance tilted in his favor. Through the festival nights, Teres began to form a larger vision. He realized that Thrace did not need to be just a collection of individual tribes. It could become a unified kingdom, where power and resources were concentrated, where alliances were strengthened through respect and prestige rather than brute force. Every strategy, every word, every action was a move on the chessboard of power that he had to command with the wisdom of a counselor and the decisiveness of a warrior. As night slowly passed, the final fires dwindled, and the forest insects' hum blended with the river's flow. Teres withdrew to reflect. He knew that uniting Thrace would not come from sheer strength, but from diplomatic finesse, the ability to read opponents and seizing the right moments. Like a noble Egyptian feast, where every glass of wine, every gesture, every story contributed to a tapestry of power, Thrace was also a banquet of strategy, where participants were not merely warriors or leaders, but artisans in the art of power. In the following days, Teres began building small alliances, testing the loyalty of each tribe and sowing the seeds of a new order. Each meeting, each observation, each gift and compliment was considered like decorative details at a noble feast, with the ultimate goal of creating a unified, strong, and enduring Thrace. In this space, full of risk and opportunity, Teres became the guiding flame, fanning scattered embers into a blazing fire of power, ready to write a new chapter in the history of this legendary land. With each step, Thrace gradually emerged not only as a wild land of warriors, but as a stage of power where intelligence, diplomacy, and strategy intertwined, reminding that true strength lies in the ability to connect disparate pieces into a cohesive, sustainable, and steadfast whole, a lesson Teres remembered and prepared to realize in his ambitious journey ahead. Under the blazing red dawn over the fields and hills of Thrace, the kingdom of Odryan began to emerge as a living entity where power, strategy, and wealth intertwined. Teres stood on high, observing the territory he had just unified. Every river, every valley, every forest was a piece of a power map that he was rewriting with both intellect and strength. Tribes that had once opposed each other now gathered under a common banner, bringing soldiers, wealth, and loyalty. But unity did not stop at subduing the leaders. Teres understood that a sustainable kingdom had to be built on a solid economy, prosperous trade, and the ability to maintain a strong army. From the scattered gold mines along the Hebrus River to the grasslands that bred war horses, every resource was fully exploited by Teres. He turned gold into a tool of diplomacy, gifting it to clans or potential allies to ensure loyalty, while controlling this resource to bargain with coastal Greek cities, creating an economic mechanism that commanded respect. Horses, a symbol of authority and power in Thracian culture, became strategic assets. Carefully nurtured, strong, agile, and battle-ready, these horses were an indispensable part of the military apparatus Teres built, from surprise cavalry attacks to agile light infantry operations. The Odrayan army under Teres was a fusion of tribal tradition and modern organization. Light infantry, armed with spears, crescent-shaped shields, and sharp Romaya swords, stormed the battlefield like living storms, striking enemy weaknesses with unprecedented speed and precision. Cavalry not only attacked but pursued, appearing in flashes, striking fiercely, and vanishing before the enemy could counter. This forced the Greek forces, proud of their disciplined phalanx formations, to hesitate. Their traditional tactics seemed ineffective against the mobility and flexibility of Odrayan troops. Yet Teres did not rely solely on brute strength. He reorganized the warriors, applying discipline while preserving their wild essence, turning each individual into a piece of a comprehensive tactical plan. Chieftains who had once led small groups now commanded unified units, attacking according to coordinated strategies rather than instinct. The combination of feral combat and tight organization transformed the kingdom of Odrayan into a military force capable of challenging both Persia and Greece. The prestige of those serving under the Adrisian banner rose rapidly, not only due to spoils of war, but also because of opportunities to advance through merit and loyalty to the king, rather than lineage alone. With a solid military foundation, Therese continued consolidating power through economy and trade. Thrace was blessed with gold, honey, furs, and abundant natural resources. Greek merchants had long coveted access to these treasures, but now all were under the control of the Odrean royal house. Trade routes were expanded, linking the interior with coastal cities like Apollonia, Thasos, and Byzantium, carrying luxury goods, wine, olive oil, weapons, and fine textiles. By controlling this network, Therese transformed commerce into a powerful diplomatic tool, exchanging gold for weapons and luxury goods while securing political support from coastal powers. The tribute system Therese implemented also marked a turning point in Thracian culture. Instead of chaotic plunder, tribes now paid structured taxes in livestock, grain, warriors, or precious metals. These revenues allowed the king to reward allies, maintain a standing army, and organize lavish feasts to reinforce loyalty. Economic stability achieved results that battlefield victories could not. It created a unified kingdom where everyone understood their position, rights, and duties, while fostering loyalty and national pride. With a strong military and economic foundation, Therese began positioning Odrean on a larger political stage. Thrace, a strategic crossroads between the Persian Achaemenid Empire to the east and fiercely competing Greek city-states to the south, became a true center of power. The king not only governed the kingdom from the capital, but also negotiated with external powers, using both military strength and subtle diplomacy to ensure Odrean's status on the ancient map. Persian governors hired Thracian soldiers as elite mercenaries, Greek generals were wary of the Odrean forces, and even Macedonian kings had to acknowledge the ferocity and superior combat skill of Terra's army. Through a harmonious combination of tactics, economy, and diplomacy, Terrace transformed a land once chaotic, full of conflict and hostility, into a unified, wealthy, and respected nation. Every step he took, from building alliances, reorganizing the army, managing trade, to establishing a tribute system, was meticulously calculated to ensure long-term stability and prosperity. The kingdom of Odrean became living proof of human capability to turn ambition into reality, transforming a fragmented region into a united power respected by both Persia and Greece. In this panoramic picture, Therese was not merely a king, he was a symbol of the ability to combine strategic intellect, military strength, and economic acumen to create a prosperous nation. He demonstrated that power did not come solely from violence or victory, but also from the capacity to coordinate people, resources, and opportunities, creating a kingdom that any enemy would think twice before challenging. With this foundation, Odrean was ready to enter a new era where influence, authority, and ambition intertwined, turning Thrace from a fragmented land into the strategic heart of ancient Balkans. Under the brilliant sunlight streaming over the peaks of Thrace, the kingdom of Odrean emerged as a living entity where power, strategy, and culture merged into a unified whole. Therese was not merely a king, but the one who transformed a chaotic land where tribes had once lived by their own laws and long-standing enmities into a stable and wealthy kingdom. While great powers like Persia and Greece compelled chieftains to submit, Therese chose a wiser path: negotiation, balancing power, and seizing every opportunity to strengthen his position. He understood that strength did not lie solely in conquest by sword, but also in coordination, negotiation, and the cultivation of loyalty. When Thracian warriors served as elite mercenaries in Persian campaigns, they not only brought back wealth and renown, but also reinforced strategic relationships, ensuring that the Adrian kingdom maintained its independence and intrinsic strength. Therese collaborated just enough to avoid invasion, but never lost the spirit of Thrace, transforming Odrean into a self-sufficient force, calculated by Persia and neighboring powers whenever they sought to intervene in the region. The Greeks, with ambitious city-states such as Athens, Sparta, Thasos, or Macedonia, soon realized that Thrace was not a land easily manipulated. Instead of direct confrontation, Therese applied subtle strategy, letting Greek powers compete with one another, leveraging their rivalries to expand Odrean influence. When Athens sought control over grain and horse trade, Therese agreed but demanded favorable conditions. When Thasos attempted to intervene in coastal routes, he applied pressure through domestic alliances. When Macedonia became too audacious, he quietly supported their rivals. This unpredictability made Thrace a land too valuable to oppose, too strong to bully. The great powers had to acknowledge that any aggressive act risked triggering the strong unity of Thracian tribes under Terrace, a feat no one had achieved before. However, Terrace's power did not rely solely on military tactics or diplomatic cunning. He also understood that a kingdom's survival and prosperity required a strong culture, a shared identity that made the people proud and willing to defend it. The Odraean court, under Terrace's guidance, became a cultural center, blending sacred rituals, politics, and art. Royal feasts, rich in symbolism, were not only occasions to display wealth, but also means to reinforce alliances, confer authority, and assert the kingdom's identity. Golden cups clinked in the hall, drums, flutes, and dances combined warrior strength with tribal symbolism, creating a space where power, spirit, and culture intertwined. Chieftains, nobles, and Greek or Persian envoys were all awed by the wealth and meticulous organization of the Odraean court. Terrace transformed traditional tribal customs into instruments of power consolidation. Religion, beliefs, and rituals became tools to legitimize royal authority, ensuring the god's approval of the king's decisions. Before important rulings, the court conducted ceremonies, sacrifices, and divinations from horse entrails or bird omens, turning seemingly mystical rituals into methods for legitimizing power. This not only reinforced loyalty, but also instilled the belief that Terrace's authority was legitimate, divine, and above individual tribal interests. The Odraean government structure was a sophisticated blend of tradition and innovation. Nobles were secured through marriage alliances, gifts, and loyalty serving as regional governors, collecting tributes, recruiting armies, and managing trade routes, ensuring the king's power extended across the entire territory. This administrative network, for the first time, transformed disparate tribes into a tightly connected political structure where every action was reported, every relationship reinforced, and every land tied to the central power in the Adrian capital. The economy was the backbone of the kingdom. Grain, livestock, gold, furs, slaves, and war horses were managed and distributed strategically, serving the military, the royal family, and allies. Through a structured tribute system, resources were ensured to maintain the army, grant rewards, and organize rituals, creating stability never before seen in Thrace. Loyalty was now based not only on tradition or fear, but also on opportunity, reputation, and reward, turning each warrior and chieftain into part of a complex yet effective system. Terrace's power was the sum of military strategy, shrewd diplomacy, rich culture, and a strong economy. Rather than becoming a pawn on the chessboard of Persia or Greece, the Kingdom of Odraean became an active player, balancing the great powers, leveraging competition to expand influence while maintaining identity and autonomy. The court was not merely a center of rule, but a hub of culture, society, and politics, where military strength was supported by wealth, loyalty, and national pride. When Terrace unified the Thracian tribes, he accomplished what had never been done before, transforming the wild, fragmented power of countless clans into an effective political system. Odraean was no longer merely a collection of chieftains under a lord. It became the first organized state in the Balkans, with an administrative network, royal court, professional army, and special control mechanisms. The king became a warrior, priest, negotiator, and protector of culture, a model that neighboring powers had to admire. Under Terrace, Odraean demonstrated that a kingdom could thrive not only through the sword, but also by creating a shared identity, cultivating loyalty, and combining tradition with innovation. Every feast, ritual, alliance, and battle was a piece of the larger picture of power that Terrace built. And thus, from the chaotic lands of Thrace, a strong, unified kingdom with lasting influence in the Balkans emerged, a living testament to the strategic intellect, military strength, and diplomatic skill of the Odraean king.